We all lived through 2020, but most of us will never truly understand what it was like inside the hospitals until now. Today's episode is deeply important because while the world was locked down, overwhelmed, confused, and terrified, there were nurses walking into chaos every single day. They weren't watching the crisis on the news, they were living it. Today, Martha Hoy is back and she's joining us to talk about what it was really like to be on the front lines in 2020, the fear, the exhaustion, the heartbreak, the humanity, and the powerful book she wrote about those experiences called 2020 Year of the Nurse, A Nurse's Journey Through the Front Lines is releasing on May 22nd. So this is more than a healthcare conversation. This is a story about resilience, trauma, sacrifice, and what happens to people when they're asked to carry the weight of the world. Martha, it's really great to see you again. We always have these incredibly important conversations.
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt. It's good to see you too.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here and congrats on the book release. That's super exciting.
Thank you.
So take us back. Take us back to the beginning. I cannot imagine what it was like being a nurse during the pandemic. Do you remember in like the start of the pandemic, in those first moments, was there a realization that something really serious was about to come down?
Yes. For me personally, um, I was working in emergency room department in Las Vegas, Nevada. And before your shifts in an emergency room, the charge nurse for the day comes to give you updates about what is happening in the community. And in Las Vegas, we have people that visit from all over the world. We have 40 million visitors a year from all over the world. So I remember the morning that the information was released that there was a possible virus and it was coming from China. And in that meeting uh, before the shift began, if there is food poisoning, if there is something that has happened in the community, we are told, watch out for this. This has happened, or watch out for this happening. And we were told, this is all we know. There's a possible virus coming from China. If anyone has traveled to China in the last 30 days or from there, if they have a fever, if they have a cough, put them in isolation. And that's all the information we knew. And we really didn't think anything big of it, again, because we are so used to hearing these things coming from the community, right? We also learned we're not to eat, right? So, at first we were just like, okay, there might be a virus coming. And we went on about our day as normal. Same old thing, And not until it came inside the hospital the first time. Now, I'm a float nurse, so I float to different departments, and then actually I float to different hospitals. So I get to see a broad picture of what is going on. And it wasn't until we had a possible patient with possible COVID, a rule out COVID, and then we had a name, because for the longest time it was this looming thing. There might be this virus. Here are the possible symptoms. And it was kind of like this thing in the back of our mind. Okay, well, if we see this, this is what we're going to do. But until we actually had a patient, that's when we knew this is real.
So there wasn't a fear immediately. I mean, for me, as someone who was outside of it, I heard things, but I was like, oh, like I can't see this like happening. I can't see this becoming more than what it is. But that's me because I'm not a nurse. What was the atmosphere like? Was there like I don't know, when you get information and you're like, no, this isn't gonna get worse than it is, or you just couldn't believe it. What was the atmosphere like?
Well, as I said at first, it was kind of like rumors in the hallway, whispers in the
Right.
hallway, right? It
Yeah.
was kind of like, oh, we hear this is happening, because the information that we get was coming from a, government agency. So, it's like so and so said. It was kind of like whispers in the hallway. Was there a fear? Probably a low level, because, just like everyone else, we were like, is this real? Is this bull? Is there like three people sick, right? But we
Yeah.
just knew, if you see this, this is what we're going to do. The first patient that I had suspected was an elderly lady. She was frightened, and so was I. So I ended up I live in Vegas, so I ended up singing an Elvis song to her to comfort her because there's not a whole lot at that time because, nobody knew.
Nobody knew. So it's safe to say that you guys did not feel prepared at all for what was coming. Do they prepare nurses for stuff like this at all?
Well, for me, did we feel prepared? No. And I don't think anything could have prepared us for what happened.
Right.
For me, as a new nurse, my aunt was a Red Cross nurse for many years. So when I became a nurse, I knew I was going to Africa. I knew that I was going to do other things. So I went through all the Red Cross training as a new nurse. So when I had Ebola training and I had pandemic training in the same day, it was one day, all day. So I understood the Ebola because I knew I was going to end up in Africa because Africa has always had my heart. But then the second part of the day was pandemic training, and it was information from the Spanish flu from 1918. And I remember calling my auntie and saying, "Why do I need this? This
Right.
information is from how many years ago? This is, I didn't see any reason for it. But little did I know, many years later, I would be using all of that and then some. Because
Wow.
none of that information, yes, some of it was valid, right? We needed vitamin D, we need, some of those things were very valid and we used them, but some of it was not. So, but I don't think anyone could have been prepared for what was next.
Yeah, like I said, 2020 felt really surreal for the average person, but I feel like for nurses, it became reality really, really fast, probably faster than it did for anyone else, really. And I can't imagine you're having to care for people, for patients who are coming in sick and terrified, but you're also worried about your own health because you don't know the severity of it as well. So, what do you feel like the hardest moments were?
Well,
Like,
I
what were
think
people not seeing?
what were all of it.
Mhm.
And I stopped watching television in 2020 because I was living it and then I came home and it was on television. So I haven't had my television on since then. It came on very quickly. And we knew when we had the first death, that's when it really clicked that this was real.
Right.
And here it comes. So March 13th of 2020 is really when we all stopped being ordinary nurses and became witnesses to history. We were caregivers during a time that nobody fully understood what was going on. So every day, sometimes in an hour, things changed as new information came in. So we had to be critical thinkers and quickly because things were changing very fast. But I think the moment, the lockdown came and we had the first death, and that's when we really could feel the looming fear in the environment because now we were like, the world is locked down. Here we are being responsible for being caregivers, and nobody knew. We had no medication, we have no way to fight. Here comes this enemy, and we have no weapons against it.
Yeah, it must have been a pretty like it's almost like a powerlessness, right? And um not to mention that, but I'm sure you guys were working way more hours than you could ever imagine. Like, what was the exhaustion like?
2020 is when I learned the true meaning of resilience. We were
No
exhausted
doubt.
physically, we were exhausted emotionally, but we still showed up. We were broken, we were tired, but we still showed up because we had a job to do.
Absolutely.
Every day was a balancing act for us because we had to care for our patients, but we also had to keep ourselves safe. And once the lockdown came, we had these little carts outside of everyone's room, and I called them the worst wardrobe change ever. That's just my sense of humor. So before we went into a patient's room, we had to N95, cap, gown, everything, gloves, care for our patient, then safely taking awning and doffing. So taking the PPE off properly is important because that's when you can expose yourself. So
Right.
we were balancing between caring for our patients and keeping ourselves safe at the same time.
Were some of your colleagues getting sick?
Yes. And we got, I I got sick with COVID, colleagues got sick with COVID, many died during that time.
Any of the nurses died?
Yes, and I also lost
Oh
a friend that was a physician, a pulmonologist as well. So we
my
were
gosh,
dealing with, again, keeping ourselves safe. We were dealing with losing people in our lives from COVID. And we were getting up every day, facing the thing that everyone was afraid of.
totally.
And we were still dealing with what everyone else was dealing with on the outside. You know, people hoarding supplies, right? You couldn't find things. We would stop before our shift, just like everyone else, and go to 6 different stores to find the things that we needed for our families. We couldn't see our families. So everything that everyone was going through outside, and then we were, uh, putting on our PPE and going into the very thing that everyone was afraid of. Now, for myself, I also worked the hospital, but I worked at a field hospital in downtown Las Vegas. Once COVID came to town, it really ramped up, and Las Vegas had to build a field hospital downtown on Cashman Field. And I received a call, and I was asked if I had any issues with working with the homeless and triaging the homeless. And of course not. I'm Mother Martha. I gladly went to help. So I was seeing COVID from the inside of the hospital and on the outside as well in the community.
Wow. So I think one thing that people forget is that nurses and doctors are human too, right? It's like, but you guys are caring for everyone else while trying to hold yourselves together. What was it like in the morning? And was there people that stopped showing up? Like, was there nurses who just couldn't handle it?
Yes, by the end of 2020, and sometimes in the middle, you've seen a mass exit of people. Nurses that were, on the edge of retiring were like, I'm not doing this. I'm leaving. So, which caused, more issues, but we didn't blame them for that. Not at all. We did not blame them for that. Around May of 2020, we started to see medications come. At first it was support, it was symptom management. And when I think of 2020 personally, I think of walking into the emergency room and beds lined the walls, people everywhere, because at that time in the ED, people were given numbers and they were tested for COVID. So they would say the numbers overhead. If they were positive, then we had to get them out of the hallway and we had to find a way to quarantine them. We became so used to hearing numbers and the word positive that when we heard negative, we were shocked. We knew we
Wow.
had to rush to protect this person from them becoming ill. And all of the things that you heard on the news, that we were running out of supplies, that we were running out of ventilators, that we were running out of body bags. Yes, all is true.
Wow, that's incredible. Was there a lot of guilt and fear and burnout? And did you ever feel like you became emotionally numb?
At some point, you just rely on your training
Yeah.
and then you deal with how you feel about it when you leave. And there was a lot of times that I sat in my car and just to get a break from being inside the hospital to going home and in the outside world and dealing what was going on there. It was kind of like a break between.
How did you look after yourself? Like, what were the things you turned to in order to ground and to keep sane, I guess? Most of the population was going crazy because they were bored and, locked in their homes, but you're in like the front lines of all of the chaos. So, what kind of tools did you use in order to stay sane, I guess?
The one that I always turn to is faith.
Mhm.
I think that's probably what has kept me grounded um, through everything that I've lived through in my life.
Yeah, the belief in something bigger and higher than yourself to keep you believing that everything was happening for some kind of bigger purpose and reason. Walk us through what it was like, the atmosphere. Like, what was every day like? Did you have to walk in and were you tested for COVID every day? What was the atmosphere like?
So when the quarantine started on March 13th of 2020, there were stations in the entryway of the hospital.
Mhm.
and also at the field hospital. So you would come through the door and then you would be checked for symptoms before you were
Right.
allowed in. Yes. I have photos of those little stations. You know, your temperature was taken, and then if you were okay, you were given a sticker. So if you see photos of me during that time as a nurse, I usually have a little sticker on my ID badge. And that little sticker, for whatever color of the day, lets security and everyone know that you have been checked when you came to the door. So that in itself was always a reality check in the mornings. Because before you would walk in the hospital, you would get your coffee, you would get your report sheets, and you would just start your shift, right?
Right.
So that was the first thing that was different, and it came to the point where we had to change before, and especially the field hospital, you know, because it was military run, that would have to completely change, put on the gear for your shift, and then when you leave, you had to do the same thing, and a lot of times I showered too because I was like, "Oh my gosh," you know, you have that underlying question at all times, "Are you leaving with COVID? Are you taking it with you?"
Yeah.
Right? So, it was always this underlying fear, but also a sense of duty to, again, keep yourself safe, keep your patients safe. We learned to, you know, teamwork and relying on each other became a huge thing because you must in these situations. We had to learn how to do things differently because we did run out of supplies. There was a time when we would have to put our masks in a paper bag and put our names on them as if that was going to keep them any cleaner.
Wow.
So we were running out of supplies. I remember a gentleman who was from lab and he had to go into the patient's room, but we had no gowns. We found him a mask. So I was still impressed by this gentleman, and this has been 6 years ago. He went and found a trash bag, he cut it up, all this stuff, and I have a photo of him standing in the hallway. And he was like, I have to go in, but I have to stay safe. So we were literally going into supply rooms and trying to dig out things uh, to make things happen so we could get our jobs done. For the patients, it was difficult because uh, they were scared. They didn't know what was happening. We didn't have any answers for them. You know, our first drugs that we gave out, I jokingly called it the worst Vegas cocktail ever. You know, we were
Right.
giving vitamin C and the drug for malaria, which, if you look back at studies now, didn't do anything. In some cases, actually made matters worse. But we had no idea. Um, at that time, you know, when a patient looks at you and says, promise me I'm not going to die, I have a special needs son at home that needs me to care for him. How do you answer that? So when you saw on the news, you know, we were running out of body bags and people were passing on, people were losing their family members but couldn't come to see them. The grieving process was absolutely not the same. They couldn't have a funeral. They couldn't say goodbye. The only thing that we could do is to pull up a screen, use video, use Zoom, and people were saying goodbye to their spouses of many years, to their family members on a screen. Thanksgiving Day of 2020 was probably the most challenging day of my career. I was working in an ICU, and we had a priest who I would love to see again, to thank him, volunteered to come in and give last rites to patients. That Thanksgiving Day, he gave last rites 5 times during the shift.
Gosh.
And because I was afraid he would put the PPE on wrong and take it off, I helped him every time to do both. And at the end of the shift on the 5th time, I said, you know, we're friends now. You know, once you have in trauma, bonding is absolutely a thing. You know, I was like, we're friends now. I hope we get to see each other outside of this. So during that time, as nurses, we saw great acts of bravery, right? And even in the world, right? You know, how wonderful people were to you know, for this gentleman to come in the hospital, put himself at risk just to comfort people when their
Mhm.
families could be there, when no one else could be there. And as nurses, we were in it. People were coming in the ER with a cough, with a fever, with mild symptoms. And sometimes by the end of our shift, we were the only ones there for them. Sometimes they ended up in body bags by the time our shift was over or in the dying process, and we were it. So we were trying to do the best that we could do to support people in that way.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because most of the world was isolated. And so most of the world was lacking human connection. But you guys were like super connected through all of the things that you were doing. Like you mentioned trauma bonding and not in an easy way. Did 2020 change the way that you see life or people?
Yes. Well, I think nursing has in general, but certainly 2020. You know, nurses see the best and the worst in humanity. And in
Mm,
2020, it put a huge magnifying glass on that.
mm.
As I said, we saw great acts of courage and people caring for each other, but we also saw great acts of violence. We had the gentleman in Minneapolis that passed on from police brutality. So people were going into grocery stores and they were hoarding and leaving little for others. So we
Yeah.
saw that on a large scale because, adversity, it creates, it shapes our character, but it also reveals our character as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's 100% true. And everyone was exhausted, terrified, burnt out, and didn't know what was happening. So it was like people weren't thinking clearly either. There's
Yes.
probably so much turmoil and like, yeah, I can't even imagine. Was there some patient interactions? I mean, without sharing anything that you can't share, were there moments or stories? I know you've mentioned a few already that you'll never forget that are staying with you.
Several.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
First COVID patient that I had that I sang Elvis to. Elvis would have turned in his grave at how awful that scene was.
I know,
But it helped her and it comforted her. And that's exactly what
right.
we did as nurses because people could not be there for their family members. We did anything and everything, whether it meant singing, whether it meant finding their favorite shows to put on television, whether that meant just holding their hand. Once people were intubated, of course, we could hold their hand. We could be there for them. We could say, hey, I'm here. Even though maybe they can't hear us, right? "Yeah, I'm here. I'm next to you. You're not alone."
Yeah, absolutely. So you wrote a book that is being released in a few days. At what point did you realize I need to write this book?
Well, in 2020, we were deemed heroes. And I wrote about this. We were given cookies with the word hero on it. Oh, you're so great. Listen, don't ever bring me a cookie or any nurse with the word hero on it. We were given pizza parties and we were told we were superheroes. And that's nice. But as you mentioned, we are not superheroes. We are humans. And at some point, again, I think it's because people were exhausted. The world was in fear. And we went from heroes to zeros. We went from being treated like superheroes to being mistreated.
Right?
And I think it's because of maybe some misinformation or just out of the fear of what they had had to live through. Also, I wanted to write about it because many of the things that happened then are affecting healthcare now.
Tell us more about the mistreatment. What do you mean by that? I don't really recall. I remember there being a flip in healthcare, but I don't really recall. So remind everyone.
Well, many nurses will tell you that, if they saw, I usually when we go to work, we will put our scrubs on and then sometimes we will stop at the gas station or just like everyone else, you stop to get snacks, whatever for the day, you gas up your car. And we would be in our scrubs and out of fear, many of us, and I know I experienced that, several of my friends were, "What are you doing out here? Why are you in scrubs? Are you a nurse?" They were literally afraid. They were afraid. Are you walking around with COVID? That is how I want to say that turn started probably September, August, September during that time. We stopped getting cookies, we stopped getting pizza parties, and it not just from heroes to zeros weren't that wasn't just the general public, that was within the hospital as well.
Wow. So it was like all of a sudden everyone was praising you, and now all of a sudden no one wants to be near you. That must
Yes.
have been absolutely insane. So, why did you feel that these stories needed to be documented?
Well, it's history.
Yeah,
What First of all, it's history. And again, because of what is happening now, a lot of what is happening in healthcare now started in 2020. Since 2020, there has been more violence towards healthcare workers than ever. There has been historical nursing strikes. The largest one in history just happened at the beginning of 2026. There's a Permanente. It was a month-long strike, over 30,000 nurses. Nurses have marched on Washington. They just marched May 8th to say there's a problem and we need to be heard. But again, we're not being heard.
what is the problem? What do you feel needs to be needs to happen in order to change things?
There's a lot of things that need to happen. First of all, patient safety should be a number one issue.
Yeah,
Since 2020, and it's actually started before then, but it accelerated in 2020, is staffing issues.
right,
People unwilling to work at the bedside. So if a nurse has 7 patients, that's not very safe, and you're not going to
right.
get the best care.
Yeah. Do you think it's nurses are still carrying trauma from that time? Has there been any type of, I guess, therapy implemented or mandatory for nurses in order to help heal from that time? Because that is like severe PTSD. Like I can only imagine what it is still like. You would still have those memories. It never leaves you. You're always going to remember it.
The answer to your question is yes, you always remember that. And even now, when I walk down the hallways of the hospital, it's like being haunted by the past.
Yeah,
You remember every patient and everything that happened during that time, and the beds lining the hallways, and the ventilators beeping, and the code blues that you were in, and the patients that really stuck with you. And at no point were we ever asked, "Are you okay?" That was never a thing, never. It was, "Here's a cookie with the word hero on it, and just keep going."
it
Yes.
was like the expectation was extreme. Like you guys had to do what you had to do.
Yes. And still to this day, if you're in a break room in a hospital and somebody mentions 2020 or those words, even a new vocabulary came in 2020, right? We're all in this together, and social distancing, and we were using words that we never used before. Now, in the break room or around a lot of nurses, if you say these things or you go back to 2020, somebody's going to cry. The trauma is going to be very, uh, you're going to see it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, I can't even imagine. I lost a grandparent during that time and wasn't able to see her, and she was in the hospital as well. So that was just like low level compared to what you guys were seeing and experiencing. How do you think that this experience changed healthcare permanently? And in your opinion, what conversations still need to happen?
Well, there was some good that came from it because now research has happened on viruses that they previously did not think could be an issue. So it opened up conversations and started research that wouldn't have happened before. We did get drugs, thankfully, that came about. We got emergency approval to use this medication in May. And it absolutely, we were skeptical when it first came out because nothing had worked. Nobody knew anything. So we gave a loading dose and then 4 doses afterwards. So it was every 24 hours and over 5 days. And this amazing change happened in people because people were coming in, as I said, with very few symptoms. They would come in with a cough and a low grade fever, shortness of breath, and then all of a sudden we have never seen anything like this before. People were absolutely turning in seconds, minutes. When we started the loading dose of this drug, we started seeing changes in people by the third dose. People who couldn't move, couldn't get out of bed, they couldn't breathe enough to go to the bathroom on their own. We saw less people being put on ventilators. And by September, 1st of October, we had full approval from CDC and the FDA and everything to use this drug. That gave us a little bit of hope during that time to start seeing a turnaround with people. When somebody in the hospital was discharged, in the hospital that I worked at that time, when they were being wheeled out for discharge, they played the song The Beatles, Here Comes the Sun, as a way to boost morale, as a way to give hope. Now, when I hear that song, it just takes me back to 2020 and brings back all the memories. I understand why they did it because it did. It did give people hope because as we were inside patients' rooms, as we were working the COVID units and we would hear the song, Here Comes the Sun, that meant someone survived. If they were leaving, they were going home. They might have been going home on oxygen, but they had survived and they were going home. So at that time, that really did do its intended purpose. It did give us hope. Oh, yes, somebody survived. Somebody's leaving the hospital. So it did give us some good things and research and new medications, conversations that need to. 2020 took more than we could ever name. And it also gave us some things. But what needs to be talked about is how things need to be changed now. Staffing, work environments, how to handle the violence. As I said, there's been more violence towards us since 2020. It has doubled. No, I don't know. Sometimes in the hospital that I work in, overhead, if there's a staff safety issue, you will hear it. They will put it overhead, and we also wear personal alarms on us as well.
Right.
Sometimes you will hear in a 12-hour shift, you will hear that 5 times. So 5
Okay.
times in 12 hours, there's an employee of the hospital, not just a nurse. This could be anyone. This could be a doctor, this could be housekeeping, this could be respiratory, this could be your PCTs, your nurses aides, anybody. So at 5 times in a 12-hour shift, there is some employee in some way being assaulted.
Right. Wow.
Yes. So why is that? I don't know. I think there has been a loss of respect for the healthcare field, or people are still, um, dealing with the effects of 2020. Culture has changed. Maybe there's probably a lot of that, all of those factors.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't this is a topic for another day, but there was all the conspiracy theories too. Like, I was one of the people who ended up with long haul COVID. I was sick for a really long time. I think I still have an inflammatory response. Like, I got COVID really, really bad. But then there's the people that talk about COVID being fabricated, and it's really hard to believe especially coming from you when you've seen all of the turmoil from it. Like, how can that possibly be fabricated? So there's all of these things going around about COVID and that it was, the government wanted this and all the conspiracy theories. So yeah, I think people are just losing trust and faith in the world in a sense, which is really, really sad.
I agree with that. And yes, at that time, and there still is, and there probably always will be a question, was
Hmm.
this a nefarious thing, right?
Yeah.
I don't question it was real because I lived it. I saw it firsthand every day.
Mm.
It was real. It was absolutely real. Those bodies that we were putting in body bags and the people that were dying before our eyes, that was real. But for us on the front lines, of course, we always had questions. Was this man made? That's just human nature. But we didn't have
Hmm.
time to contemplate that because we had lives to save, we had things to do.
Hmm.
Whether it was done on purpose or it was a natural jump to humans, either which way, here it was, and we had to deal with it.
Absolutely. So tell everyone what you hope that they will get from reading your book that's being released in a couple days. What is the main message you want people to hear from it?
The main message is it was real. We did live it. It is now affecting your healthcare. It is affecting how we care for you, how we care for your family members. And we don't like it. We want to be heard. As I said, we're marching on Washington, nursing strikes. When people look back at this time in history, nursing strikes will be one of the things that is at the top of the list of things that happen. And what I can hope for is in the long run, everything that happened, all of the bad, that someone will listen to nurses and change things so that in the end, it will be better for everyone.
Yeah, I love that. So thank you so much for being here today and for having real, open, raw conversation about such a sensitive subject. What would you say to the any healthcare workers that may be listening right now who maybe still be struggling emotionally?
Many are still. I understand. It was a difficult time. It was a difficult time because we had to be strong as we were caregivers during a time no one understood what was going on. And things changed so quickly and in every day. I understand that is something that will probably always carry with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again, Martha, for this conversation. So your book releases on May 22nd,
Yes.
and I truly believe that this is a conversation that people need to hear. So where can people find your book and connect with you?
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, the usual book outlets. And you can find me on all social media platforms.
Amazing. So we'll make sure to have that linked in the show notes as well. Do you have any last minute thoughts before we wrap up today?
My hope is that someone will listen. And if not to me, listen to another nurse. Listen and help us change things.
Thank you. Well, I think this conversation is definitely the start of it, and the right people are going to hear it. So, thank you for being here, and not only for the work that you did during one of the hardest periods in modern history, but for having the courage to come here and share it so openly and honestly. So, to our audience, we will have a link to Martha's book and all the information about it in the show notes. And if this episode moved you, please share it because behind every headline in 2020, there were real people carrying unimaginable weight. And as we heard today, they still are. So stay tuned for the next episode. And thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. Until next time, take care.